Why did no one look twice when she stepped off that plane, humiliated, silent, and steady, as if she were just another forgotten face in the crowd? And why, despite the sting of the captain's words still echoing in her ears, did she keep walking like she had somewhere far more important to be? No one knew the truth. Not yet. Not the passengers who laughed at her. Not the flight crew who sneered. Not the airline that would soon learn the cost of mistaking quiet for weakness. Lysandra Vale adjusted the strap of her old backpack as she walked through the cold air, the metal steps biting into her palm. Her faded gray sweater hung loose on her frame, soft with age, and the soles of her sneakers whispered against the tarmac. It would have been easy, so easy to let anger rise, to look back, to shout, to remind them who she was. But anger never helped her hold steady in a cockpit at 30,000 feet, and it wouldn't help her now, not when she had a mission to finish. She breathed once deep and slow, then she walked. Inside the terminal, the world moved without noticing her. Suitcases rolling, announcements crackling overhead, passengers rushing to futures they believed only belonged to people who looked like them. A barista's eyes skimmed her clothes before she even reached the counter. A group of businessmen whispered just loud enough for her to hear, the way people whisper when they believe their words won't matter. "She's probably here to clean the place," one muttered into his polished latte. Lysandra didn't look at him. She didn't look at any of them. She had learned long ago that the people who judged loudest were often the smallest inside. And yet, even with a lifetime of discipline behind her, the sting still found a way in. Not because she cared about their opinions, but because she recognized the shape of it. That sharp, dismissive ignorance was the same thing she had seen on faces in briefing rooms years ago when she'd walked in as the only woman in the unit. The same skepticism she'd felt pressing down on her spine before her first solo flight. The same patronizing smile a general had given her right before telling her she wasn't cut out for high-risk missions. "You don't need to be loud to be heard, baby," her mother used to say, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes. "Just be steady." Steady, always steady. She took her coffee, settled at a small corner table, and let the noise fade around her. She wasn't here for comfort. She wasn't here to be seen. She was here for truth, and the plane crew had shown her everything she came to confirm. But there was something she hadn't expected, something that sat heavy in her chest like the weight of a classified file she wasn't allowed to open yet. The humiliation hadn't bothered her. She'd endured worse. What bothered her were the echoes of laughter, the camera phones lifted with excitement, the delight in seeing someone who looked less than being pushed out. She'd seen that before too, just in different uniforms, different deserts, different missions. A child dropped a toy plane near her bench. Plastic wings skittered across the floor. Lysandra picked it up and handed it back to the boy. His mother offered a quick thanks, then frowned at her clothes as though gratitude had limits. The boy held the toy close. "Does it really fly?" he asked. Lysandra's lips softened. "Only if you believe it can." His eyes widened with a kind of hope that felt too rare in the world. Hope that reminded her of her father's old hangar, of scraped knuckles and late nights, of watching him tinker with engines until the world made sense again. "Up there," he used to say, patting the wing of their small practice plane, "nobody cares where you came from, only how you fly." The boy ran back to his mother, and Lysandra felt the old ache surface, a quiet mix of pride and grief. So much of her life had been built in silence. So much of her strength had been forged from being underestimated. Her phone vibrated, a message from Claire, her assistant. "They're panicking at HQ. You good?" Lysandra typed back, "I'm fine. Keep them waiting." She zipped her notebook, stood, and moved toward the exit. The humiliation on the plane had started slow, just like her missions used to. Quiet at first, harmless on the surface. Then it escalated, tone shifts, postures changing, a crowd sensing weakness and moving in. She walked into the cabin with her boarding pass held neatly between two fingers. First class, paid in full. The man in the tailored blazer laughed first. "Lost your way to economy, hun." then the woman dripping in gold, then the head flight attendant, Tanya Red, whose smile was too bright to hide the contempt underneath. "This is first class, ma'am. We have standards." Phones lifted, eyes watched, the air changed. Lysandra remained calm, even when Captain Elliot Crane strutted down the aisle, sizing her up like she was a threat to the brand rather than a paying passenger. He barked orders without reading her ticket, his voice booming just loud enough to rally the crowd behind him. "This isn't a soup kitchen. Get her out." The laughter became a wave, one she let wash over her. Years ago, she'd sat in a helicopter while incoming fire rattled the airframe. The sound of laughter didn't frighten her, but it revealed things about people that gunfire never could. "You're making a choice right now," she told the captain quietly. He didn't listen. They rarely do, the ones who believe authority makes them righteous. When Tanya tore the ticket in half, the sound cut through the cabin like a verdict. Phones caught everything. Faces gleamed with satisfaction. Some even clapped as she was escorted out, as though cruelty was entertainment. She reached the bottom of the metal steps, turned just enough to see the crew silhouetted in the doorway, and whispered the only words she needed to. "Thank you, I've seen enough." She wasn't angry walking across that tarmac. She wasn't defeated. What she felt was something deeper, a resolve forming in the quiet space beneath her ribs, a reminder of every mission she'd ever flown, every life she'd protected, every moment she'd been underestimated only to rise without raising her voice. People show you who they are when they think you're nobody. Her father's voice, always steady. She took a cab toward downtown, the city lights painting shadows across her face. The driver looked at her in the rearview mirror, saw the worn clothes and tired eyes, and asked gently, "Rough day, miss?" Lysandra smiled, small and honest, just part of the mission. But he didn't understand. No one did. Not yet. She leaned her head against the window, watching the world blur past, the neon signs, the crowds, the brief flashes of humanity that always appear when you look close enough. She felt the weight of what was coming, the storm she was about to walk into, and the truth she carried with her, quiet and undeniable. Tomorrow, she would walk into Orion Air's headquarters. Tomorrow, the people who laughed would see her again. But not as the woman they mocked. As the woman who owned their future. Still, she wondered if they'd recognize her. Somehow she doubted it. After all, people rarely look twice at the ones they choose to overlook. And that was her greatest advantage. Why did the silence feel heavier than the humiliation she'd endured? Why, as she stood in the elevator rising toward the top floor of Orion Air headquarters, did the memory of that laughter echo louder than the steel cables humming beneath her feet? Lysandra Vale had faced sandstorms, night raids, engine failures at altitude, yet this stillness felt stranger, more suffocating. Because this time, the battlefield wasn't made of dirt or sky, but polished floors and people who built kingdoms out of arrogance. The elevator chimed. Her reflection in the doors didn't surprise her, black vest fitted cleanly, hair pulled back, no makeup, an old backpack hanging from her shoulder like a soldier keeping her gear close. She didn't look wealthy. She didn't look like the chairwoman of a global aviation conglomerate. She looked like herself, stripped of every armor she normally wore in boardrooms. But she had learned something in the military a long time ago. When you know the truth, appearance is irrelevant. When the mission is clear, noise fades. The doors slid open. Inside the boardroom, Orion's executives pretended not to panic. Suits too crisp, smiles too wide, conversations too loud trying to camouflage the fear curdling underneath. All of it familiar, all of it predictable. At the center of the chaos was Gavin Hall, the interim CEO, packing with a desperation that clung to the air like static. His tie hung crooked, his face blotched red. He didn't notice the door open at first. He was too busy barking orders at the PR team, slamming his hand against the table like dominance could erase consequences. "Get that video down now," he snapped. "Pay whoever you have to, shut it all down." Tanya read. The flight attendant who had torn her ticket sat stiff at the far end, her perfect posture rigid now, like she had swallowed her own pride and it was stuck somewhere behind her ribs. Captain Elliot Crane slouched beside her, arms crossed, sunglasses on the table like a trophy he didn't deserve. They whispered to each other, but their eyes darted toward the door. And then they saw her. Silence cracked through the room. Lysandra stepped inside, quiet but undeniably present, a shift in the atmosphere that even the oblivious could feel. Her gaze scanned the room, not hurried, not angry, not triumphant, just observing, measuring, like a pilot calculating wind before takeoff. She didn't sit. "Good morning," she said softly. It felt like a command. Eyes widened, breath caught. Gavin froze mid-stride, his expression stuck between a greeting and a gasp. "You," he choked, forcing a laugh so thin it nearly disintegrated. "Miss Vale, Chairwoman Vale, we had no idea you were the evaluator. Of course, please, let's talk." Lysandra tilted her head slightly, not dismissing him, just clarifying the battlefield. "I believe you've met me before," she said. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. Tanya's chair scraped backward. Elliot stared at the table, the muscles in his jaw trembling. Someone from the PR team swallowed so hard it echoed. Lysandra set her backpack gently on the floor, an oddly intimate motion for a room filled with tension, and folded her hands behind her back, a stance she had stood in hundreds of times during military briefings. Calm, controlled, unshakable. Gavin cleared his throat. "Let's begin, shall we?" She said nothing, which was somehow worse for him than any accusation. Silence was a scalpel, and she wielded it like someone who had learned early in life that words were often wasted on people who didn't listen. During the corporate presentation that followed, graphs, numbers, jargon, Lysandra watched, expression unreadable. Her thoughts drifted, not because she was disengaged, but because she had learned that true flaws revealed themselves when people believed they were performing well. Gavin bragged about customer satisfaction percentages. A PR rep highlighted the airline, inclusive policies. Tanya tried to keep her hands from shaking. Elliot chewed on the inside of his cheek, pretending he wasn't shrinking. And Lysandra remained still, listening, waiting. But beneath that stillness, something else churned, a quiet, unexpected ache, not for herself, but for every person who had ever been dismissed for the way they looked, spoke, or dressed. Every passenger who didn't have the power she had. Every kid clutching a toy plane who would grow up learning where the world believed he did or didn't belong. She breathed slowly, in, out, steady. Then she noticed him. A young janitor mopping the hallway just outside the glass wall, his uniform too big, his shoulders small and tense from years of trying to be invisible. He moved quietly, carefully, trying not to be noticed by the sea of suits inside the room. The kind of person everyone walked past without acknowledging. She stepped out during a break. He startled, nearly dropping his mop. "Sorry, ma'am, didn't mean to be in the way." "You're not," she said softly, picking up a paper scrap he'd missed and handing it to him. His eyes widened in confusion. No one ever acknowledged him. "Thank you," he murmured, voice trembling a bit. Lysandra nodded once, an almost military gesture of respect, and stepped back into the boardroom where the air smelled of panic. The meeting resumed, more excuses, more polished lies. Tanya finally spoke, her voice shaking despite her professional facade. "Ms. Vale, I deeply regret the misunderstanding on the flight. Truly, we are committed to treating every passenger with respect." Lysandra looked at her, not angrily, not coldly, just truthfully. "Is that what you call tearing my ticket in half?" The room held its breath. Tanya's eyes filled with something she hadn't planned for: shame, or maybe fear of consequences she never imagined facing. Elliot cleared his throat. "We acted on protocol," he muttered, though his voice cracked halfway through. Lysandra watched him carefully. There was something about him she couldn't yet place, something unresolved, something that didn't match the bravado he tried to hide behind. But she let it sit. Some answers needed time to reveal themselves. Just like missions. Just like people. When the meeting ended, she walked toward the large window overlooking the tarmac. Sunlight glinted off plane wings, shimmering like the mirage trails she, once seen in desert heat. She thought of her father, of grease-stained hands and stubborn dreams. "This is freedomless," he used to say, running his fingers across an aircraft's metal skin. "The sky doesn't judge." She wondered what he would say if he saw her now. Maybe nothing. Maybe just a nod. The kind pilots give each other across airfields, silent acknowledgments of storms weathered alone. Her phone vibrated again. "Claire, stock has dropped 30%. Investors texting nonstop. They're scared." Lysandra typed back with the same steady calm she had used during night missions. "Let them wait." Outside, the planes rolled across the airport, engines humming like distant thunder, a sound she had trusted all her life, a sound that reminded her she didn't need revenge. She didn't need to raise her voice. She just needed to act. And tomorrow she would. But something inside her whispered that this wasn't just about an airline anymore. It was about dignity, about truth, about every moment she'd been small in someone's eyes but enormous in her own heart. The sky didn't judge. People did. And people could be taught. In the glass reflection, her eyes were steady, not proud, not triumphant, just certain. They had mistaken her silence for weakness. Tomorrow, they would learn what silence could really do. Why did the city feel different the next morning, quieter somehow, as if it were holding its breath? Lysandra stepped out of her hotel elevator and felt it instantly, that strange stillness that comes right before turbulence hits. She felt it on runways when the wind shifted. She felt it in briefing tents before a mission went sideways. And now she felt it here, in the glossy marble lobby where executives pretended everything wasn't falling apart around them. She didn't rush. She walked through the lobby with the same steady rhythm she had learned years ago, boots hitting sand, heart steady even when the world roared. Except now her sneakers carried her across polished stone, her old backpack a soft counterpoint to the expensive suits swirling nervously around her. A few guests glanced at her, noticing the simple clothes, the worn straps, the quiet posture. They looked away quickly, assuming she was someone who didn't matter, someone whose footsteps wouldn't leave a mark. It didn't bother her. It fascinated her. Every assumption said more about them than her. But at the edge of the lobby, she saw someone who didn't look away. Elliot Crane. The captain stood stiffly near the entrance doors, his uniform perfectly pressed, his hat tucked under one arm. And for the first time he looked small in it, like the fabric didn't quite fit the man he was pretending to be. He saw her approach and straightened, plastering on a smile as brittle as thin ice. "Miss Vale," he began, voice rehearsed, "I came to personally apologize for yesterday's misunderstanding. I'd like to offer you a private tour of our new fleet. Let me show you the best of Orion Air. We're top tier." She stopped in front of him, not close enough to intimidate, not far enough to seem afraid, just close enough to make him face the truth. "You had your chance to show me who you are," she said quietly. His smile faltered. Look, things got out of hand. I misread the situation." "No," she said softly, calmly, like correcting a trainee pilot. "You read it exactly how you meant to." For a moment something flickered in his eyes, anger, defensiveness, maybe even regret. But it passed too quickly to name. She walked past him, her steps silent across the marble. Elliot didn't follow. He didn't call after her. He just stood frozen in the lobby, staring at the floor like it held answers he didn't know how to ask for. Outside, the morning sun cut through the clouds as her driver opened the door. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Claire, press conference in 3 hours. They're trying to spin everything. You ready? Lysandra typed back, let them talk first. She rested her head against the window as the car merged into traffic. The city blurred by billboards, honking taxis, early commuters racing against time. Her mind drifted to her younger years, sitting in a dusty airfield while her father worked a wrench like it was a conductor's baton. He used to say that engines told the truth. Voices lied. People lied. But engines, they always told you when something was about to break. She found herself wondering, what was about to break today? By the time she arrived at Orion's headquarters, the building buzzed with frantic energy. Reporters clustered outside like bees sensing honey and blood at the same time. Security rushed to control the crowd. A wall of camera lenses flashed like miniature explosions. As Lysandra stepped out of the car, the crowd rippled, first confusion, then recognition, then shock. The woman they'd seen on the viral video was no longer the invisible passenger in a faded sweater. She wasn't hiding now. She walked with the steady ease of someone who had jumped out of helicopters in darkness and landed on both feet. Inside, she could feel eyes follow her, but unlike on the plane, no one laughed. No one whispered. No one sneered. Fear had replaced arrogance, and fear made people quiet. She entered the auditorium just as Gavin Hall stepped onto the stage, adjusting his suit as if the right posture could erase the past 48 hours. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, projecting false confidence, "Orion Air is stronger than ever. Yesterday's incident has been thoroughly addressed. We remain committed to excellence." Lysandra walked down the aisle, her footsteps unhurried. It took a moment for the crowd to realize she wasn't heading to a seat. She was heading to the stage. Someone whispered her name. Someone else gasped. Gavin froze mid-sentence as she climbed the steps and stopped at his side, hands folded behind her back, posture calm, eyes level. He tried to smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Vale," he said, the microphone catching the crack in his voice. We weren't expecting." "I know," she replied. Her tone was soft, but the room went silent. She nodded at Claire, who waited near the front row. Claire tapped her tablet. The screen behind them lit up. The footage played. Tanya's smirk, Elliot's bark, passengers laughing, the ticket ripping, the humiliation echoing through that cabin, loud, cruel, unchecked. Reporters sat frozen, cameras zoomed, pens scribbled. Lysandra didn't look at the screen once. She looked at the people, the ones who had watched her walk onto that plane and decided she didn't belong. She wondered how many of them were thinking of their own choices now. When the video stopped, the silence was so deep it felt like a vacuum. Lysandra stepped up to the microphone. "Vale Holdings will not be acquiring Orion Air," she said, voice steady, no anger, no theatrics. "An airline that judges its passengers by their clothes doesn't deserve to fly under our name." The words landed like a controlled detonation. Clean, precise, irreversible. Gavin swayed slightly, like gravity had shifted under him. Tanya covered her mouth, tears slipping past her mascara. Elliot stared straight ahead, eyes dull like a man who had just realized he wasn't invincible after all. Reporters erupted into questions, but Lysandra had already stepped away from the podium. She walked down the aisle, the crowd parting around her like water around a ship. Outside, the sun had climbed higher. A light breeze brushed against her face. For a moment, it felt like standing on a runway before takeoff, air shifting, engines warming, the world holding still in anticipation. She paused at the edge of the sidewalk, her backpack slung over one shoulder. Behind her, the building trembled with fallout shouts, running footsteps, phones ringing in panic. Ahead of her, the city breathed, alive, indifferent, wide open. Her phone buzzed. "Claire, they're begging now. Gavin wants to resign. Tanya's crying in a stairwell. Elliot's blaming PR. What do you want to do next?" Lysandra looked up at the sky, blue, endless, free. What she wanted wasn't revenge. It was accountability. And something deeper, quieter, something she hadn't named yet. She typed back, "Let them come to me." She started walking, not knowing exactly where her steps would lead next, but certain the storm wasn't over. Not for them, not for her, and not for the truth. The mission was far from complete. Why did their faces look different now, tired, hollow, stripped of the arrogance that once filled every gesture? Lysandra watched them enter the quiet hotel lounge one by one, their steps hesitant, their confidence gone. It wasn't triumph she felt, not satisfaction. It was something heavier, something she recognized from the military. The moment when soldiers realized the mission had gone wrong long before they ever saw the enemy. The first to approach was Gavin Hall. He wasn't wearing his expensive jacket today. He looked smaller. His tie hung loose again, but this time it wasn't a power pose, it was surrender. He clasped his hands together like he had spent the whole night rehearsing a plea. "Miss Vale," he said, voice raw, "we will step down, all of us, just give Orion another chance. We can fix this." Fix this. People always said that after the damage was already done. Before she could respond, Tanya Red stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached for Lysandra's arm. "I didn't mean it," she whispered, tears clinging stubbornly to her lashes. "I was following protocol. You have to believe me." Lysandra gently freed her arm from Tanya's grip. The touch hadn't been malicious, but it had been desperate, and desperation often blurred the line between apology and self-preservation. Elliot Crane lingered a few steps behind them. He couldn't meet her eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked under the weight of something he'd never had to feel before: accountability. "I'll take the blame," he murmured. "All of it, just don't ruin the airline for my mistake." She studied him quietly. It would have been so easy to tear them down in that moment, to deliver the speech everyone expected, a sharp, moral lesson about dignity, respect, consequences. But speeches were wasted on people who only listened when fear forced them to. So she asked one question. "When I was on that plane, did any of you say stop?" Her voice was soft, steady, but the silence that followed was suffocating. None of them answered. Gavin's throat bobbed in a dry swallow. Tanya lowered her eyes. Elliot whispered something under his breath that sounded like remorse but came too late to change anything. Lysandra nodded once, nothing judgmental, nothing cruel, just a simple acknowledgement that now they knew the truth. Silence wasn't neutral, it was participation. She left them standing there, their apologies hanging in the air like smoke after an explosion. The driver opened the door, but she didn't go inside yet. She stood there, letting the wind brush her face, grounding herself the way she used to before missions. Her phone buzzed. "Claire, they're falling apart without you even trying. Want to come to the diner?" She typed back, "On my way." The diner sat on a quiet corner of the city, its neon sign flickering like it was tired of shining. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, old vinyl booths, and conversations whispered over years of worn-down days. Lysandra liked places like this. They reminded her of small-town mornings with her parents, of simpler truths. Claire waved her over to a booth tucked in the corner. The moment she sat down, the waitress approached, a middle-aged woman with soft eyes and tired shoulders. She set 2 plates on the table with the practiced grace of someone who'd served thousands of meals and seen thousands of stories. "You look like you're carrying the world today," the waitress said quietly, her voice gentle but observant. Lysandra paused, fork hovering midair. "Just a piece of it," she replied. Something flickered in the waitress's expression, a knowing, almost maternal concern. She placed a small stack of napkins beside Lysandra's plate, a quiet, human gesture, a reminder that kindness didn't need an audience. As the waitress moved away, Claire leaned in, lowering her voice. "They're collapsing. PR is in flames. Shareholders are begging you to come back to the negotiation table. If you gave them an hour, they'd rename the entire airline after you." Lysandra set her fork down carefully, staring out the window. Outside, a plane ascended in the sky, cutting through the clouds with the grace only machines built with purpose could have. She followed its path until it disappeared. "How quickly people shift when they're afraid," Lysandra murmured. Claire watched her. "You're not afraid of them." "No," she said softly. "I'm disappointed in them." Claire hesitated. "What are you going to do?" Lysandra didn't answer. Not yet. The mission was forming, taking shape like a flight plan she could finally read clearly. But before she decided the future, she needed to understand the past, her own and the airline. She excused herself and stepped outside. The air was crisp, a little sharp on the inhale, the kind that reminded her of early morning drills in windswept deserts when the cold bit hard before the sun rose. She walked for a while, letting the city noise fade into a hum. Eventually, she found herself standing at a small overlook above the river. The water moved steadily, unbothered by the chaos on the shore. For a moment, she closed her eyes. She remembered nights during deployment, lying in a tent while the wind whispered against the canvas, thinking of the sky she missed, the planes she longed to fly, the life she wanted to build when she finally came home. She remembered that feeling of being small in the world, yet large inside herself. Strength had never been the absence of pain. It had always been the ability to keep moving even when pain tried to anchor her. Her phone buzzed again. "Claire, they're waiting. What do you want me to tell them?" Lysandra typed slowly. "Tell them nothing. I'll speak when I'm ready." And she meant it, not out of cruelty, but because silence, used properly, could shift the ground beneath people's feet. It could force reflection. It could reveal truths pride tried to bury. She walked back to the hotel as evening settled into the city. Lights flickered on in office buildings. Taxis honked. People rushed home from long days. But when she entered the lobby, she felt eyes again, not mocking, not dismissive this time, but searching, curious, aware. A few guests whispered her name under their breath. Someone nodded respectfully. Someone else stepped aside to give her space. Funny, she thought. Respect shows up once people realize they underestimated the wrong person. She reached her room and set her backpack gently on the desk. The same old backpack that had traveled with her across continents, held ration packs, maps, classified folders, and now a simple notebook filled with observations and questions. She opened the notebook and stared at a single sentence she'd scribbled days earlier. "What do people become when no one is watching?" She read it again, then closed the notebook slowly. Tonight wasn't about decisions. Tonight was about clarity. She stood near the window, looking down at the city lights, her reflection faint against the glass. People could learn. People could change. But only if someone pushed the first domino. And she knew, deep in her bones, she was meant to push it. Not for revenge. Not for headlines. But for every silent person who had ever been told they didn't belong. The night settled around her, calm and steady. Tomorrow she would act. But tonight she allowed herself one rare, fragile thing. Hope. Why did the morning feel like a breath held too long, like the world was waiting for her answer before it dared to move again? Lysandra opened her hotel curtains and watched the sunlight spill across the city, climbing the glass towers like it was reaching for something more. It reminded her of dawn patrols, when the first light broke over the horizon and everything felt possible, even in the midst of war. Quiet, precise, hopeful in a way she didn't always understand. She took a slow breath and let it settle. Today wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about humiliation or the faces that had sneered at her on the plane. It was about the kind of leadership that didn't need applause. The kind her father taught her by example, not lectures. Do what's right, even when no one knows you did it. Her phone buzzed. Claire, they're waiting in the boardroom. Again, all of them, what's the plan? For a moment, Lysandra didn't respond. She set the phone aside and picked up her old backpack instead, fingers brushing the frayed seams. This bag had traveled through more storms than anyone in that boardroom could imagine. It had been with her when she flew reconnaissance missions that lasted through the night, rationing her own thoughts just to stay awake. It had been with her when a sandstorm grounded her unit for 18 hours, and she shared her water with strangers who barely spoke her language. It had been with her when she took her first civilian flight home, heart trembling with the fear of being forgotten. She tightened the strap, grounding herself. Then she walked out. Down the elevator, across the lobby, through the city street where passers-by glanced at her with a new kind of awareness, not the mocking dismissiveness from the day she was thrown off the plane, but the cautious respect people give when they know someone carries truth like a weapon. By the time she reached Orion Air headquarters, the lobby was packed with staff pretending to work while secretly watching the elevators. Word traveled fast inside a sinking ship. And that was exactly what the company felt like now, listing, groaning, trying desperately not to tip. The elevator doors slid open on the executive floor. Gavin, Tanya, Elliot, and several board members were already there. They shot to their feet as if standing could protect them from consequences. Gavin stepped forward first. "Ms. Vale, please, we're ready to cooperate. We'll do whatever you want. Orion is nothing without your support." Lysandra walked past him, not rudely, but with the measured calm of someone who saw through the panic to the truth beneath it. She stopped near the window, looking down at the planes lined neatly like fragile promises. Finally, she spoke. "I'm not here to destroy Orion Air." The boardroom exhaled all at once, an almost pathetic sound of relief. "But," she continued softly, "I'm not here to save the people who failed it either." The relief evaporated instantly. She turned around slowly, her gaze moving across each face. Gavin's, Tanya, Elliot, the PR team, the executives clutching folders as if paperwork could shield them from their choices. For a second, her gaze lingered on Elliot. He looked different today, less arrogant, less armored. There was something raw in his eyes, like a man who had finally seen the reflection he'd spent years avoiding. "Before we talk about futures," Lysandra said, "I need to understand something." Elliot swallowed hard. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Not just to me, to anyone who didn't fit your idea of belonging." He opened his mouth, closed it, looked helplessly at the others, and finally, with a quiet resignation, he said, "Because it was easy." The room stilled. Elliot ran a hand over his face, voice cracking. I thought that's how you kept control. Set a tone. Show people you're in charge. It's stupid now that I say it out loud, but in the moment it felt like that was the job." "No," she said, voice steady, "that was abuse." He lowered his eyes, shame pulling at his shoulders. Tanya spoke next, her voice small. "We weren't trained to see people. We were trained to enforce rules. Appearance protocols, passenger matching, first-class behavior codes. I followed what they told me to follow." Lysandra held her gaze. "You tore a stranger's ticket without checking her name." Tanya's breath trembled. "I know." Gavin tried to step in, but she lifted a hand. "Not yet." Silence fell again, heavy, necessary. Then Lysandra walked to the head of the table and placed her backpack on the polished wood, an old piece of fabric amidst expensive suits and corporate pride. The contrast was deliberate. "You know what this bag has seen?" she asked. No one answered. War zones, desert nights, broken villages, people who had nothing but dignity, people who treated strangers better than you treated one of your own passengers. Her voice didn't rise, but each word hit like a controlled strike, efficient, disciplined, devastating. She reached into the backpack and pulled out her notebook, opening it to show the blank pages. "This notebook is empty," she said, "because I wasn't evaluating your numbers. I was evaluating your culture." The room held its breath. "And what I saw," she continued, "was rot." Gavin sank into his chair. Tanya covered her mouth. Elliot looked like the guilt was physically crushing him. She closed the notebook gently. "And that is why I'm not giving you a second chance." A gasp ran through the room. Gavin lurched forward. "Please, Lysandra, please just let us." "But," she said, and the room froze again, "I'm giving the airline a second chance." Confusion swept across their faces. "You won't lead it," she explained. "You won't shape its future. But the people who were invisible here, the ones you treated like background noise, they will." She glanced toward the window, imagining the different faces she'd seen over the past days. The young janitor mopping the hallway, the call center reps eating lunches alone, the ground crew workers avoiding eye contact with executives. "Tomorrow," she said, "we begin rebuilding from the bottom up." Gavin's voice broke. "You're replacing us." "Yes." "With who?" "The people who remember what respect feels like," she answered, "because they've lived without it." She gathered her backpack, slinging it over her shoulder. None of them stopped her. None of them dared. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back, not with triumph, not with anger, but with a painful softness. "The sky doesn't judge," she said quietly, "but it remembers the ones who tried to rise." And she walked out, leaving them with their silence, their shame, and the dawning realization that they would never lead Orion Air again. Outside, the hallway was calm, sunlight cutting across the floor in long, steady lines. She took a slow breath, grounding herself. This wasn't the end of her mission. It was the beginning. Because justice wasn't a moment. It was a rebuild. And she wasn't done building yet. Why did the cabin feel different this time, warmer somehow, humming with a quiet kind of hope instead of judgment? Months had passed since the day she was kicked off this very airline, and yet as Lysandra settled into her economy seat, backpack tucked under the chair in front of her, it felt like stepping into a future she hadn't dared to imagine that first humiliating afternoon. Not victory, not revenge, something gentler, something cleaner. Her fingers brushed the worn strap of her backpack, grounding her as the engines hummed to life. Around her, the cabin filled with families, students, first-time flyers clutching boarding passes like precious artifacts. A baby babbled softly. A teenager filmed the takeoff for a vlog. A father in a faded jacket held his son close as he pointed out the window, whispering stories of clouds and dreams. This was why she hadn't walked away. This was why she'd fought. The Flight for All program had launched quietly at dawn, no flashy announcements, no corporate theatrics. Just a simple truth: anyone who needed to fly would fly. The new Orion Air was built not for status, but for people who had spent their lives being told the sky wasn't for them. And today she was flying with them. A young girl across the aisle hugged a stuffed bear so tightly its seams pulled. She wore shoes a little too big, clothes a little too old, and eyes filled with a wonder Lysandra remembered from her own childhood. The girl peeked at her shyly. Is this your first time flying too?" the girl whispered. Lysandra smiled softly. "I've been up there a few times." The girl nodded like she was receiving wisdom from a hero in a storybook. The trust in her eyes was so pure, so unguarded, that Lysandra felt something warm unravel in her chest. When the plane lifted off the ground, the girl clutched her bear and gasped. Lysandra watched her, feeling the faint tremor beneath the floor as the wheels left Earth, an old sensation she knew intimately. She remembered the first time she'd flown alone, nervous fingers gripping the edge of a worn seat while her father squeezed her shoulder and whispered, "Up there you're not small, you're free." Freedom had always felt like this, quiet, honest, weightless. A man in the seat ahead turned toward her. His jacket was frayed at the cuffs, hands rough with calluses that told a lifetime of labor. "I saw you on the news," he said, voice low, cautious. "What you did, it means something to people like me." Lysandra held his gaze. "It wasn't for me," she said gently. "It was for all of us who have ever been told we don't belong." He nodded, eyes glassy with gratitude he couldn't find words for. Then he turned back to the window, breathing a little easier. She could feel the cabin shifting around her, not physically, but emotionally. The atmosphere carried a softness she'd never experienced on any commercial flight. People weren't posturing. No one was pretending to be more than they were. They were just people, in the sky together, sharing something fragile and beautiful. Her gaze drifted to the front of the cabin where the beverage cart clinked softly. Tanya read, no longer head attendant, no longer decorated in perfect lipstick and polished pride, pushed the cart quietly. Her hair was tied back in a simple ponytail. Her uniform wasn't crisp. It was lived in. Human. When Tanya reached Lysandra's row, she hesitated. The tray in her hands trembled slightly. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lysandra nodded, "Thank you." Tanya poured carefully, her hands steadying as she focused on the task. She didn't look directly at Lysandra until she turned to leave. And when she did, her eyes held something Lysandra hadn't seen before. Not fear, not guilt, but humility. "Thank you for giving us another chance," Tanya whispered. Lysandra said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence between them carried enough truth. Further down the aisle, Elliot Crane handed a soda to a child, bending slightly to match the child's height. His once arrogant posture had softened. His eyes didn't dart around the cabin searching for validation anymore. He met each passenger where they were, quietly, earnestly. When he noticed Lysandra looking his way, he didn't flinch. He nodded, a small gesture but sincere. People could change. She believed that more now than she ever had. As the plane continued its climb, the clouds opened like a silver curtain. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching on the girl's stuffed bear, illuminating the worn fabric like it was wrapped in light. Lysandra felt her breath catch. So much of her life had been built in shadows. Missions that never made the news, battles fought in silence, dignity defended without applause. This moment, this cabin of strangers connected by hope, felt like the first real sunrise she'd let touch her heart in years. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the new Orion Air." It was Elliot's voice. Not anymore. A new captain, someone from the ground crew, promoted after years of being overlooked, spoke with a steadiness Lysandra recognized. A steadiness earned, not bought. "We're honored to fly with you, every single one of you." Lysandra closed her eyes briefly, letting the words settle. She felt the rumble of the engines like a heartbeat beneath her feet, strong, steady, honest. When the plane began its descent hours later, the passengers clapped softly, not the forced applause she'd heard on previous flights, but something grateful, almost sacred. A mother leaned across the aisle. "Thank you," she whispered. "My daughter, she's never flown before, you made this happen." Lysandra's throat tightened. "She made it happen," she said. She believed. As the plane touched down, the cabin erupted in warm chatter. People collecting bags, children laughing, passengers offering small smiles to one another like shared secrets. Lysandra stood, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. She walked down the aisle slowly, feeling each step like it mattered. Because it did. Every step she had taken since the day she'd been pushed off a plane had led to this moment, this quiet redemption, shared by people who didn't even know her name. At the jetway, the young girl with the stuffed bear tugged her mother's sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, pointing up at Lysandra, "she's brave." Lysandra turned, meeting the girl's wide, earnest eyes. She didn't correct her. She didn't shrink away. She smiled. Outside, sunlight touched her face as she stepped onto the ground. A soft, honest warmth she felt deep in her bones. People walked around her, unaware of the weight she carried or the weight she'd let go. And for the first time in a long time, she felt light. Not because she had risen above anyone, but because she had lifted others. As she walked toward the terminal, her father's words echoed again. The sky doesn't judge, it just waits for you to rise. And in the quiet that followed, a final truth settled gently, like a landing so smooth you almost didn't feel it. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when it does, the world learns to listen.